Well, hello there. I'm David, and I'd like to welcome you to the series of videos covering my build of the 4-foot studio scale Millennium Falcon. This series really starts back in 1977 when I was about 7 or 8 years old and living on the now long closed Canadian Forces Station Lowther. Sometime around late spring or early summer, my parents and I made the 40-minute drive to Kapuskasing, Ontario to see a space movie people seem to be talking about. The Royal Theatre in Cap, which still exists, boasted seating for about 150 people. It had a single water-stained screen and a 2-speaker stereo sound system. About 2 hours after sitting down in that crushed velvet seat, everything for me had pretty much changed. To say that Star Wars had an impact on my life is really a massive understatement. My interest in story building, my interest in building things. George Lucas became a real role model for me as I started my businesses. What drove him to be able to take a business that he essentially started in his garage and turn it into a business that he'd sell years later for about $4 billion. But one of the things that really struck me most about Star Wars was not so much the story and the characters, although they're very fun, but how they did it, the technology behind it, the skills involved in the people making the models, creating the motion control system for filming those models. That sort of crafting of a world is one of the things that really inspired me. I've built a lot of models over the years. The very first one that I ever built, that I remember building, was actually a Star Trek model kit, the 3 spaceships in a box. And over the years, I've built many science fiction kits, from the MPC R2-D2 to the Fine Molds Millennium Falcon to this guy behind me. This is the DeCastini 32-inch Millennium Falcon. It is a 1-to-1 replica of the filming model that ILM made for The Empire Strikes Back. And I'm sure I'm mispronouncing the company name, but that's okay. This model I built over a couple of years, and it was mostly waiting for the parts to arrive, but also the painting. I spent probably 4 months, 5 months just doing the painting. And that was in an effort to get the paint job as close to what ILM had done as possible. I also took the time to change some of the little greeblies that DeCastini provided with parts from the real model kits that ILM used in the real filming model. Not a lot, probably 7 or 8 from kits that I could easily get and that the parts were easily identifiable. But then when I was finished this, I thought to myself, well, now what? When it comes to projects, I'm always trying to one-up myself. So how do I one-up myself from a 1-to-1 replica of a Star Wars filming model? Well, you build the bigger filming model. Let's build the 4-footer. But David, it's the 5-footer. Well, no, not really. This is commonly known as the 32-inch Empire Strikes Back filming model. And it's called the 32-incher because that's how long it is. But in ILM parlance, this is 2-footer because that's the diameter of the dome. The larger one that modelers and studio scale enthusiasts and common Star Wars fans, the casual fans, refer to as the 5-footer, is 5 feet long, but ILM never referred to it as that. The domes are approximately 4 feet in diameter. That's what I'm going to try and refer to my build as, although I will occasionally, I'm sure, slip up and say 5-footer just because it's a habit that everybody gets into. But just know that when I'm speaking about my 4-foot build, it's the same thing as everybody else is calling the 5-footer. It's just that I'm trying to use the ILM terminology. Something else you'll hear me speak about a lot is the term studio scale. Well, what does that mean? To me, studio scale is a bit of a misnomer. It was a poorly conceived term because the reality is that scale has nothing to do with what it is that studio scale modelers build. In this context, studio scale simply means that it is modeled to the same dimensions and as accurately as possible to replicate the filming model that the special effects company used. Scale is sort of irrelevant because none of these models have scale. If you're building a 15-inch model and the original filming model was 15 inches, it's very possible that you have a studio scale model. This is the Bandai 1/7/2 scale Millennium Falcon. This is not a studio scale model. This is a scale model of the studio scale model if the studio scale model was its fictional real size. I should also point out that I'm obviously not the first one to attempt building a full-size replica of the Millennium Falcon. It's been done at least 3 times that I know of. There are at least 3 completed 4-foot builds that I'm aware of, and there are various others in various states of completeness. One of them is even being reproduced and done completely as a 3D printed model. And from what I've seen of the CAD images and some of the early prints, it looks fantastic. I cannot possibly thank all the courageous souls that came before me that allowed me to be doing this project. There are people that have spent decades researching the greeblies and the kits that were used on the Millennium Falcon. In my research, I've identified, I think, 3 new parts. So my hat goes off to them. While I can't possibly name every single person that has contributed to this build, there are a few names that I really do want to mention. The first is Stuart Brown. He is an Australian fellow. He is very long way ahead on his build. He has a series of videos that you should check out. He does some really amazing work, and he has helped me with my project. Provided me with the hull domes that I'll be using, and he's provided me with dimensional help and many other things. So hats off to Stuart. The other person I would like to mention is John Kaufman. He is the keeper of all things part maps. What part maps are the images and the indexes of what part is used where on the hull of the Falcon. And he has been doing an outstanding job of maintaining those and updating them and correcting them as new information comes along. I don't know if he was the first one to ever do this. I'm sure there was somebody before him, but he's the current keeper of all things part map. And he also runs the site sci-fi-kitbash.com. So if you want to see kit scans, or if you want part ID help or any of those things, Sci-Fi Kit Bash is the go-to site for that sort of information. There's a couple of other people that I would like to point out. Andrew B., that's the only information I have on him. He did all of the scale drawings that I've used to create my hull and my parts and things like that. I don't know when he did those, but those are his drawings that I'm using, so thank you very much for that. Somebody else that I would like to thank is, I only know by his screen name. His screen name is Shaman over on Replica Prop Forum. He has been very gracious in helping identify new parts and correct some of the things that are incorrect with the Bandai kit that I have been using for reference and part identification, double checking, and measurement double checking. The Bandai kit gets quite a few things wrong, and he's always been there to help make sure that those things get corrected. So again, I cannot mention everybody. This video would be a million miles long. So if I have not mentioned you, it's not an intentional slight. Just trying to keep this video to under 24 hours. But thank you. My personal goal with this build is to make it as accurate as possible. There will have to be some concessions due to workshop and limited materials, and some things you just can't get anymore. My level of OCD will not allow me to not make it as correct as possible. It's really impossible for me to do it 100% exactly as ILM did it. But if I can do it as ILM did it, I will try my best to do it that way. That's the goal. In some cases, I don't know how ILM did it. I don't think anybody does know how ILM did it. And if they do know, well, they're not sharing. So in those cases, I will use the techniques that I have at my disposal, and I will make it look as correct as possible. Once it's painted and once it's on the model, you should never know that I created that part or that section of the model in a way different than ILM. I'm also not going to shy away from using modern technologies to build this. When I am working on a section of the model, like for instance the cockpit cone, I model it in Blender and I use that 3D model to create patterns from which I can create that part out of styrene. So this is it so far. The frame that I modeled in Blender and 3D printed, completely PLA, except for these two tubes in the middle. It's just hardware store aluminum. And you can tell right away one of my big concessions that I had to make. Obviously, in 1976, when this originally was built, no such thing as 3D printing. They did all of this out of wood, and I don't have a wood shop. I don't know anybody that does have a wood shop, and outsourcing the components to be made at a wood fabricator would have just been astronomical. So the biggest single concession that I have made with this build, if ILM made the part out of wood, I am going to 3D print it. Now what saves that is no wood is visible on the exterior of the model when you look at it. So everything you see here will get covered in acrylic or ABS or styrene. So I don't feel bad about making this 3D printed. And so that's it for episode 1. And I hope you found it interesting and you found it enjoyable. This is a project that's going to take at least 2 to 3 years to complete, and I hope you will follow me along in that journey. The next video will discuss the kits and the enormous amounts of research that went into finding those kits that are used on this build. And then later on, we'll talk about things like mandibles and the engine deck in specific areas. So thank you again for watching.